A graduate. Got it. Recording in progress. Cool. Great. So I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to speak quickly because there's a lot I want to share with you. So hopefully it won't be going too fast. But I'm going to be doing a little talk about the organization where I work, IDEO.org, talking a little bit about some of the methods that we use in doing our work, and then give you a snapshot of what it looks like in practice through 2 case studies. So we are a nonprofit design organization. Our mission is to design a more just and inclusive world. We are about 11 years old with around 80 employees stationed in studios in New York, San Francisco, and Nairobi. Over the years, we've worked with organizations in more than 45 countries in designing solutions that have reached over 68 million people. And you may recognize the name IDEO. We actually grew out of a for-profit design consultancy that's much larger and much older called IDEO, which was founded in the late 70s in Palo Alto and really helped develop the craft of human-centered design, which I'm going to talk quite a bit about in this talk. And if you're not familiar with human-centered design, the sort of one sentence version of it is basically like figuring out what people really want, going deep into what their preferences are, and then making products and services that speak to those needs. And IDEO early on designed the first Apple computers for Apple. They designed the first mouse for Microsoft, and really made a name for themselves in the product design space. But then over the years, really tried to take that methodology to more far-reaching design challenges and see what else that methodology could be useful in. So just an example to paint the picture, right before the pandemic, there was a team in IDEO working with a major airline on redesigning the boarding experience for commercial air travel, which if you've traveled recently, you know has not been put into service yet, but hopefully it will be. And sometime around, actually when I was a student at DT, about 2007, our former CEO and co-founder Jocelyn White joined IDEO to really start to help take these methods and bring them to the social sector. And IDEO's worked, here and there with in the public sector, with government, and also with this in the social sector. But there was a real concerted effort to figure out how do we wield design for good in a more systematic way. And after a couple of years of trying out different projects and different types of clients, the realization that IDEO came to was that in order to work successfully in the social sector and in the public sector with philanthropy, to accept grants, to be able to work on nonprofit budgets, what was really needed was a different business model. What we needed was a nonprofit. IDEO as a for-profit consultancy working with Fortune 100s isn't just quite tooled to work with that community. So we launched IDEO.org, a separate nonprofit charitable organization. And since then, we've been building our practice and our craft ever since. So what do? We design products, services, campaigns, and programs that advance health, economic mobility, and well-being. There's sort of a lot that goes into each of those categories. Just to give a couple examples of what we think about when we think about well-being, we're thinking about belonging, agency, voice, the kind of sometimes tangible, sometimes intangible things that every human needs to live an empowered life. So we have a number of different ways that our work is structured. I'm just going to touch briefly on a couple of the populations we specifically focus on. The first one is women and girls. Obviously, since the beginning of humanity, we've had a gender inequity problem that continues. And so there's really no element of our work that doesn't have a gender equity lens. A lot of the early work we did at IDEO.org was focused on access to reproductive health care, in particular contraception, and efforts to destigmatize, make more accessible those methods for many reasons, not the least of which is that choice about when to start a family has a really outsized impact on the economic potential of a person. So that was one of IDEO.org's first most significant portfolios. We also work a lot with refugees and migrant communities. There's obviously an urgent refugee crisis on the planet. And so that work feels really preeminent for us, but also as a design organization working in a particularly resource constrained environment really feels like a prime opportunity to bring the design methods, to bring solutions forward that are otherwise not as obvious to the naked eye. And then the last one I'll touch on, and these are not all the populations we work with, but just a couple again. In the United States, we work a lot with low-income families, particularly families with young kids, because that is an intervention point with really significant consequences for kids when they get older. If you're able to improve the early childhood development experience for a young kid, like 0 to 3-ish, and also increase the income for the adults in that family, there is an exponential impact on the earning potential of that child when they're older, and thus the contribution to building generational wealth. So most of our work in the US focuses on families with young kids. So how do we work? We practice human-centered design, which is an approach to innovation that starts by understanding people's goals and aspirations, their hopes, their fears, their needs, and ends and solutions that are truly resonant to them. And this is a point at which I might just illustrate the sort of prevalence of a it's good enough mentality in the social sector. Sort of like, well, we're providing these charity services, and the fact that we're providing them alone is good enough. And at IDEO.org, we fundamentally reject that framing in every way. Not only is it incredibly disempowering, it's also totally ineffective. None of us none of the people who are privileged enough to make choices about which services or products they want to use go for it's good enough. You go for what's best because it makes you feel great and because it really works. And it's our belief that everybody deserves access to services that are wonderful. And also, we just don't think people will use them if they're crap. So if we're serious about helping people improve their lives, then we need to make things that are truly outstanding. So I just mentioned, we start with understanding what people want. We start in this sort of desirability realm. A lot of social service and government service traditionally has started on this side of this Venn diagram, usually with the sort of like a policy idea that either has already been done or it's understood how to make it. And then it gets into a budget conversation where we figure out like how much money is available for us to spend. And then the idea tries to get into the sort of desirability range, usually through an underfunded marketing campaign. I'm being glib here, but like there's a lot of history in terms of social and government services that take this pathway. What we're trying to do is come in from the desirability lens, understand what people really want, what they're going to use, what's going to fulfill them, what's going to empower them. But we cannot ever stay in this zone. We can't stay in just the realm of really interesting creative ideas, because that equals zero impact. The impact happens when we then bring in these other lenses as design constraints, and we are able to create solutions that are both viable, feasible, and desirable. So, I mean, this work always starts with listening. There's no amount of homework or prep that we can ever do that's enough to build the context that our teams want to have for the projects. But at the end of the day, the work doesn't truly begin until we're sitting down with the participants who will use the service that we're hoping to build, or the people that will be delivering it, whether they're frontline caseworkers or doctors, and really grounding ourselves in people's lives and understanding sort of what do the barriers look like from their perspective, what do the opportunities look like from their perspective, and all of the work begins with a conversation like that. Another hallmark of our approach is that we prototype solutions until we get it right. I mean, we have an expression which is we build to think. And the sooner we are making our ideas and observations concrete and putting them in people's hands, the faster we begin to learn about what people really want and what works or what doesn't work. We work in diverse multidisciplinary teams. Yeah, it's me. Our organization is woman founded, majority women, majority BIPOC. And the diversity and inclusivity of our teams is fundamentally core to the strategic success of the work that we do, because we cannot do this work successfully if we are sort of overwhelmed or burdened by a singular societal lens on the world or on this work, or even a cultural understanding of what design is or should be. So while we can't on our team represent 100% of the humans on this planet, we're always building teams that are diverse, both in background, lived experience, design, craft, so that it's constantly challenging itself, inspiring itself, and opening the door to sort of a new way of looking at things. Because without that, you end up in a very tunnel vision sort of space that leads to poor solutions. Another thing that leads to poor solutions is designing in a silo. So we work really closely with our partners, not just to get the solutions in the world, but to even figure out what they should be. This work cannot be done on an agency style model where we start with a brief, go off, make really cool stuff, and come back final presentation and try to dazzle people. This work has to be done hand in hand from day one to day two, all the way through the end of the project and beyond, with the people who are designing, who are responsible for putting the service out into the world, that will be responsible for evolving it over time and making it better, and who are accountable to the end user. So I think this is my last little spiel before I get into the case studies, a little bit of a synopsis on human-centered design and how we think about the process. You can break it down simply into basically 3 core phases. The first phase is inspiration phase. It's all about understanding people's needs and finding the right opportunities for design. A lot of these problems are like really complex and multifactorial, and it can be easy to get sucked into trying to solve all of it, but that's just really not possible. So we have to find the right opportunity for our talents. So the inspiration phase always starts with research, which is again about interview, about observation, about going shopping with people, maybe you going to work with them and really trying to understand the day-to-day life and the context of the problem itself. Another one that we often use in the inspiration phase is co-creation, getting crafty. You've never felt more awkward until you put a glue stick in the hand of a government minister who thinks that they've come to opine about their view on the state of the world. But people find ways to express things that maybe they weren't even sure they knew how to express when you give them interesting creative methods like this, and people tend to surprise themselves and have a lot of fun. Also, these types of activities kind of level the playing field and sort of remember that we're all humans in the room, so they can be quite rewarding in that way. Another method I'll touch on, and obviously there's like heaps and heaps of these, and you guys are learning them and practicing them in school as well, is analogous inspiration, where we will go to a completely different sector, maybe even like the luxury sector, and look for inspiration that we can bring into the work. So like if we're working, for instance, if we have a hunch that the business model for a new service is one that's like subscription based, maybe we'll go out and we'll do some research with Netflix, or we'll go to find some other kind of subscription-based service. And maybe we can't bring the feature that we get excited about directly into our work, but we can bring design principles. We can bring sort of an understanding of the emotional experience for the customer. We can bring all sorts of inspiration back into the work. So the next phase is called ideation. And this is where we start to prioritize, like, what have we learned in the inspiration phase? What do we think the most important solutions are going to be? Shaping them up and then getting out and testing them rapidly. And the way we prototype, yes, we prototype in late stage where we're kind of perfecting what we think the first generation solution is, but most of our prototyping, and I think the prototyping that's most effective in our work, is coming early stage. Like oftentimes it's mixed into the research phase, where we're taking the ideas and even the questions, and we're just making them concrete. So that can take a lot of different forms. You see on the bottom right, there's some foam core and like plots up here in the studio, just to start to like roughly get out some design elements for this series of mental health clinics that we designed for Santa Clara County. That can be super scrappy, and you can even learn a lot from an activity like that. And like these guys, you can have a lot of fun. On the top right, you have, these are like static images as app screens. that are easy to set up. You can even, we sort of also printed these out in hotel rooms at night with a portable printer, and just put something in someone's hand like right away, find out what information they wished was on the screen, what feels extraneous, ways to move really fast. And then just to like really stretch the boundary here on the top left, you have a nail salon that's been set up in a reproductive health clinic around sort of the age-old question, how do you make these services more relatable? How do you make these spaces where reproductive health services are being offered safer, more friendly, and more inviting? That every health clinic should have a nail salon? Probably not, but it does illustrate to the partners that we work with, and also to the team, that a small amount of investment in the experience can go a really long way. Because when we set up this nail salon, tons and tons of people started coming and hanging out, and then having these really candid conversations about reproductive health, which they otherwise weren't having. So the prototyping phase is critical. It's also where our partners learn a lot about how to take risks and how to iterate design themselves and build tons and tons of their own creative confidence. And it's also so much fun. And then the last phase of this, of the HD process, simplified, of course, is the implementation, where we take all the learning, all the selection, all the narrowing, and the hard choices about what we're keeping and what we're not keeping. And we design the first gen of whatever that service or program is. And this is a community health worker in Ethiopia that's out in a village using a curriculum with young women to help them start to think about their own lives, what they want, what their aspirations are, what their plans are, and sort of help them see, you know, for themselves where they think a family fits into that timeline. And then eventually, if they're not ready to have a family, then to start considering reproductive contraception. You know, it could be a brochure, it could be an app, it could be a solar lantern, whatever the final product is. You know, we go through a phase of intensive design. And of course, as you know, it doesn't end there. Like, that's just V 1.0 at this point. And so what we're hoping is to come back for iterations as we learn more and more, and as our partners learn more and more about the products and services that they're offering. Okay, so that was a whirlwind tour of who we are and a high-level overview of the methods that we use. I'm going to take you through 2 case studies, and then we'll go to the Q&A. So the first one is in Dallas, Texas, which is around a design brief of trying to figure out how to increase uptake of benefit programs. And we did this with an organization called the Childhood Poverty Action Lab, which is a Dallas-based nonprofit that we've worked with a lot, that are a really tremendous organization. And they have a strategy, which is to cut child poverty in half in Dallas, I think in the next decade. And there are several pillars to that. And one of them is nutrition. And in the States, in America, and in particular in Dallas, there is a lot of unleveraged public assistance funds. So these are federal programs that are funded by the national government. They get distributed locally, and there's a lot of money left on the table. In Dallas alone, for a specific nutrition program called Women, Infants, and Children, which is the one that we were working on in this sprint, there's something like $30 million a year of unleveraged service support. So there's a lot of reasons why that's the case, which I'm not going to go into right now. But for CPAL, this is a massively missed opportunity, and also one that should be relatively simple to correct because it doesn't require new money. The money is there. So now the question is, how do we leverage it? So again, there's this program, WIC, Women, Infants, and Children. The program basically provides money for expecting moms and moms with young kids to get groceries and formula. And not only are people enrolled in it, they are also quitting out of the program before their eligibility is up. So we know we've got some problems with WIC. So we started doing the project with CPAL. As I mentioned, we work really closely with our partners. So from their team, we had an embedded food policy specialist that was with us for the whole project, who was extraordinarily knowledgeable about the policy space. And the initial hypothesis was that people didn't know about WIC. There was an awareness gap. If people knew about it, then they would sign up for it. So we began doing our research. We use a lot of the methods that I described above. And, after a series of interviews with supermarket managers, with moms, going shopping with moms, what we learned was that, yes, more people could know about WIC. And actually, we have a big awareness problem for all the benefits in the States. But actually, the WIC experience, both enrolling in WIC and using WIC, was so lousy that even if you told enough people about it, most of the people who were signing up for WIC were learning about it word of mouth in a sort of referral from someone in their community that they trusted, and people had a really negative impression of WIC. So we began prototyping. On the bottom right, we prototyped sort of like a new enrollment center, because the enrollment experience, which requires an in-person visit to meet with a nutritionist, was like going to the DMV on a bad day. So no one wanted to be there. So we dressed it up a little bit. Ultimately, I think this is a sort of like obvious prototype that does more to illustrate that a small amount of investment can go a long way in making a space feel more safe, welcoming. And that's just sort of like a table stakes thing that all providers should do. But the really, I think, telling prototypes came when we started to get into more of what the WIC experience was all about. So one of the things happens when you go shopping with WIC is it's super confusing. If things are not well labeled in the supermarket, the people who work in the supermarkets don't actually know what products you're entitled to, and it's not as obvious, right? Every supermarket carries a different selection of brands, different sizes, different levels of quality. So moms are going shopping and it's very confusing. And then when they go to checkout, if they have by chance brought the wrong product to the checkout counter and WIC won't pay for that, the cashier will say, sorry, you can't have this. So then the person has to run back to the aisle, find the right thing, and it's really humiliating. It's a terrible experience. So some of the prototypes we tried were like, you see here in the middle, we tried like WIC ambassadors. Like, what would it be like to have someone in a store? We tried better wayfinding and all sorts of guides in the aisles, basically, to help the stores illustrate which products were eligible. And then if that one was out of stock, like what the alternative was. We tried a barcode at checkout idea where if you had brought the wrong product, this cashier could ring you up with the correct one with the barcode, and you could just kind of run back and grab it. And ultimately, we prototyped a whole bunch of different stuff, and with CPAL, developed a roughly like 35 solution playbook for them to start working on. And the one that they've been working on that's seen the most action right now is mobile enrollment, bringing enrollment out of these centers, which, as I mentioned, is a huge barrier, and bringing it into neighborhoods where people can sign up for WIC. We're seamless, and the enrollment numbers in Dallas on WIC are starting to go up. So that's really awesome. The last thing I just would say on this case study is that after the principal design work was done, we had a workshop with moms from Dallas and also the federal regulators who run this benefit at the national level, and the state regulators who run it at the state level. And the conversations that happened between moms and regulators was really, really awesome, because the moms were just really blunt, and they were like, look, this is what this needs to be. And I think that the regulators were inspired by that, and I think also in some cases surprised at actually how attainable and pragmatic many of the solutions would be that actually would make WIC more effective. And so I call that out just to say, which is like the design methods themselves yield great design, but actually the process of using creativity and design methods to bring groups of stakeholders together also puts people on an equal playing field and creates a sense of optimism and possibility that actually unlock a lot of the other non-design related barriers to social impact, which are basically sort of like the will and commitment of the people who control the system itself. So that was really rad. Okay, so that's Dallas. We're gonna now go to a completely different use case. Sorry, fix my little screen share thing here, which is looking at how to unlock the conditions to support world-class customer service delivery at Alight. Alight is a global refugee service organization US headquartered, working in many countries, serving about 3.5 million refugees a year, and an organization that we've worked a lot with over the years on tons of design projects. Basically, if you think about this is a shot of a refugee camp in Jordan. There are about 90 million refugees and internally displaced people in the world right now, which is an absolutely staggering global crisis. It's actually accelerated quite a lot in the last 5 or so years. And in addition to solving the root causes of why people become refugees, when it comes to the actual supporting refugees in the moment, almost none of them are being asked, what did you think of the service that you got today? No one's being held accountable to the refugee themselves. What's being measured are meals delivered, water delivered, and those are important metrics. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, we need to have those targets. We need to actually exceed them. But what Alight was recognizing was that they knew that a lot of their customers, and that's how they think of them as customers, were dissatisfied with their services in many cases. And they didn't know sort of on which issues, and they were not collecting any feedback because they weren't asking. And so they came to us and said, we want to know what people really think, and we want to improve the quality of service that we're providing to our customers based on their ideas and their feedback. And that also connects to a fundamental belief that we hold at IDEO.org, which is the people who have the best ideas about what they need are the people who need whatever the thing is themselves, and really valuing that as expertise that's equivalent with anything that you would learn in school or build in a career. So we began a project with them to build that. What we ended up creating was something called Kuja Kuja, which means come come in Kiswahili, which is a system to improve customer satisfaction that is both digital and visible to the entire Alight organization, and also immediately practical on the ground, surfacing good ideas and putting them into action. So this is a couple of snapshots from the very first phase. We did multiple phases of work with Alight on this project over the years, probably I think 4 or 5 different projects. And you can see the team basically like slapping up initial ideas of like, what should we measure? Like what kind of metrics are we actually interested in? As with any good design project, you have to narrow the brief, I think, as tight as you can get, because otherwise you just end up boiling the ocean and you have too many ideas, too many problems to solve, too many stakeholders, and you get nothing. So with Alight, again, a global organization, we decided to pick one single refugee camp, and we picked a single service, which is the clean water delivery at this refugee camp in Nakivale, Uganda. Basically with the premise, like, if we can get this right, then we can learn how to scale a system where we are collecting feedback. So you can see some of the early prototypes, including this like really junior varsity PComp project on the bottom right of a couple of LEDs, basically saying like, is the water on or is the water off? And then trying to figure out like, how do we collect customer satisfaction information? So the team built this little point of service feedback box that you see on the top left, where it's just like a happy face if you were satisfied and a frowny face if you are not, much like the little "Are you satisfied" buttons you see in the airport bathrooms that no one wants to touch because it's an airport bathroom. So we set this up on the belief that like this would just give us good real-time data. No one wanted to use them, and we couldn't figure out why until someone said that because it's backlit and the panel at night, it glowed and it looked like a devil. So we got rid of those, and we ended up with a tablet, which you see at the bottom right, where Alight agents who are in the camp working there would basically be at the point of service at the water point, and also kind of just walking around the camp. And they would walk up to people and ask them, were you satisfied? And they would move the little yellow ball from to frowny or to happy. And then that would invite a conversation. So you'd get the data, binary, good or bad service, and then you'd start to get the ideas. And that was really awesome. We started to build a panel where the team locally was able to go into all of the ideas and start to sort them and prioritize which ones they wanted to take for action, and a platform where all the data in real time is visible, not just to the camp director, but to the country director for Alight, to Alight global headquarters. And if I'm not mistaken, most of this data is still public. So anyone can go on and look and see like what's the customer satisfaction level for Alight in this location. And now there are a lot of other service providers that are using the same platform, Kuja. The last thing I'll just point out, again, there's many details to this service, but like the brand, right? How do you make this accessible? How do you make it friendly? How do you make it fun? And so there's a whole, brand book that goes with the service itself. So I'm gonna show you a 2-minute video because I think it's just super cool to hear the Kuja team in their own words. And then after that, we'll go to the Q&A.
Kuja means come. We're working every day improving the services provided to refugees, driven by the voices of those who know them best.
So they go with a tablet and we ask precisely 2 questions. Were you satisfied with the service? And after that, do you have any ideas to improve?
Rero twebwe ikibazo dufise ntidushobora kugishikana hariya ariko tubonye kuja turumva ko umutima uremye tukabibabwira. I am a listener. I don't impose decisions on people. I listen, I guide if possible, and I try to make it better.
When we come back from the field, we look through all those ideas and we take them to the service teams and they fix it.
That same information is also transported to decision makers around the world through an online dashboard. Twebwe aho tudashobora gushika imbere bo baca bahadushikira. Yego.
Everybody's voice counts. People have brilliant ideas. No matter their level of education, no matter the conditions where they live, they have voices and great ideas which we need to listen to.
Kuja is going places. This is just the beginning.
Awesome. So that's the end of the presentation. And Catherine, I'll hand it back to you. And hopefully we've got some time for some questions.
Oh, we definitely have time for questions. And I just want to thank you so much for that great talk. It was so fascinating to see some of the work from IDEO.org and the work that you've been pushing through there. Before we start question and answer, one of the things that really caught my attention was this idea of listening and how much listening factors in to the design process. And I think I'm just gonna let that sit here as we go ahead and open up questions to everyone out there. Please, if you've got a question, you can feel free to use the reaction button to raise your hand. You can also go ahead and enter your question into the chat. I'm going to be monitoring that as well. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask? Okay, so we're starting in the chat. Number 1, where are the most business projects inquiries coming from? And which one does IDEO prefer and why? It's a 2-parter though, so I'll stick with that one first, and then we'll get the question 2 in. And then is it Siu? I think you're next, or Siu?
Yeah, so most of our, it's interesting, most of the projects that we do are funded by philanthropy. And so we have a lot of relationships with philanthropy to sort of either respond directly to grant proposal, like requests for proposals that they put out into the world, or to try to matchmake between the nonprofits that we know that we want to work with the philanthropies. Oftentimes we will co-pitch. So with CPAL, we've written a bunch of proposals together because we just sort of like, these are our people, sort of, we feel that way about each other and we're going out to get funding. So I think, that's the reality of it. I think we've done some government work, actually quite a bit, and I'd like to see more of that, just because the scale the government has is really obviously substantial. But yeah, that's where most of our incoming work comes from.
And then there was a second part of that question, which was, with international offices, how were your design methodologies and ways of working accepted in various cultures and countries, especially when dealing with local governments or corporations?
Yeah. So I think, so I'm just going to break that apart a little bit. So part of the thinking behind the fact that we're in two countries is to get closer to our work. And for a long time, most of our teams were based in the US, and we were traveling globally, and we didn't really have much of a US portfolio, actually. And so when we decided to set up the Nairobi studio, where we've built a really amazing team, which is like predominantly East African designers, it gave the opportunity for the US teams to really do the same thing, which is say, how could we be working more locally as well? And from that, we've built the US portfolio, which is now about 60%, 70% of our work. And in each location, you have ways of working that are just culturally more appropriate, or commonplace. And it's important to be flexible with that. It's important to understand like what parts of this work are immutable, and for us that's really about ethics and treating people with respect, and I think you can find people in any society that hold those values as well, so that's easy. And then what parts of the process are we not going to be precious about, and are we going to allow our teams to evolve as they see fit? And I think the process itself provides a good superstructure to build on, but teams in each studio, teams in different countries for different projects, teams working with totally different types of partners, which is alluded to here, like working with governments, are always going to have to evolve the way that they work in order to either make a safe space for the folks they're working with, or fit within the constraints of the project that are peculiar to their project. So I think it requires you to be flexible, but also know what you stand for and hold firm to that.
Okay, excellent. We have see you. Did you want to ask your question? I know you put that hand down, but you were next in the lineup.
I typed the question because my mic quality is not that good. Yeah, it's in the chat box.
Okay, I found it. All right, let's see. Since each project requires a different type of expertise, what type of people are usually on the design team?
Yeah, so our core design team is made up of a blend of communications designers, interaction designers, design researchers. We have some writers, strategists. We've had and still have some industrial designers. And then we tend to augment projects with specialties that are required, whether they're things like data science, architecture, software engineering. We have had software engineers on staff in the past, and also content expertise. Like, this is important. Like, we need to be able to show up to these projects understanding the nuances of the policies that are at play, of the science that's at play, of the ecosystem of actors, whether it's government, or otherwise. So, depending on the needs, we may bring in a contractor to do that work. We might bring in someone from IDEO, our cousin, the for-profit. We might bring one from another organization that we know. So yeah, it's important to have a core team that is diverse enough to support most projects, but also to bring in that expertise when you need it.
That's great. This is a question from Pepe or Yicheng. And the question is, may I ask what is the most challenging project so far and how your team went about mitigating that?
That would be a contentious question. What I won't tell you what the most challenging project is, because also I'm being recorded here, but what I will tell you is that I find that the most difficult types of projects tend to be ones where the brief is too big and we have not aligned closely enough with our partner around the right expectations, whether it's for what the output of the work will be or for the way in which we will do the work. Nothing is harder than getting into a project and realizing that actually your partner organization doesn't have a strongly held and informed view about what the right intervention space is, and that we are not ready to wield our design methods because a whole lot of foundational research, stakeholder engagement, table making has to happen in order to figure out like what would be a worthy project in and of itself. And so that's why it's incumbent upon our partnerships team, that is the group on our team that's developing these projects, to both be informed about the sector, able to ask really hard and poignant questions, and also to really understand where design methods can be most impactful and shape that project as best they can from the outset. Short of that, everything else feels relatively easy. Like the work is hard, obviously, but you know, it's comparatively a lot easier.
Excellent. We have a stack of questions here, so I'm working to get through them. This is from Vitek, and the question is, can you tell us more about the Nairobi studio? Why this location was chosen, and how does it enable projects that otherwise might not be possible in the New York City and San Francisco studios alone? So I think it might be a bit of a follow-up to what you started talking about, the rationale for why that studio, and maybe I guess a little more detail about that.
Definitely. We picked Nairobi for a couple of reasons. One is we had long had a pretty substantial portfolio of work in East Africa, and we continue to. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's a region with a lot of need. It's also a region where there's a lot of philanthropic investment and a lot of interest and activity. There is a really awesome design scene and a ton of creatives in Nairobi. So it sort of had the confluence of like, it was a place that we knew, a place where we knew there was need, a place we knew there was funding, and a place we believed that we could hire a local design team, because it was really important to us to not just sort of have satellite offices, but actually be a global organization where the stake of the country is vested sort of equally in all of the studios. So even right now, like our, the Nairobi leadership team is part of the senior leadership team of the company. And we balance sort of like one US based executive design director, one Kenyan based, same for the partnerships team. It's really about trying to create that balance. And we wanted to be proximate to the work. We also wanted to, as I said, we wanted to have a local team. And also we wanted to be able to reduce the cost of the project so we can work with more nonprofits at lower rate. So yeah, there's a ton of factors that went into that. And it is also closer to other regions as well. So we do work out of that studio in South Asia, and other places that are just sort of like more time zone compatible than they are with the US.
So let's see, where were we? We are at Julie Nisa, and this is the question here is, I'm going to scroll a little bit back and forth between the chat. How does IDEO collaborate with local stakeholders, NGOs, and governments to obtain local information and create strategies? How do you ensure that all organizations get an equal say during the prototyping phase and the implementation phase of a project? And this is interesting to me because I think what this question is really speaking to is the power dynamics at play, right, in doing these kinds of projects.
Absolutely. I mean, the reality is we can't ensure that all organizations get equal say. But what we do is, when we think about this a lot, and I think the first step comes to sort of like, who are your partners? If you're picking partners that are not interested in ceding power and power sharing, then there will be none of that on the project. And even if you're told in the sort of prep for the project that that's something that they'd like to do, if you don't pressure test that, it won't happen on the project, and it will be really disappointing. So it's about selecting at the outset the right partners, and that's both on the funder side So there are some philanthropies that are really advanced in their thinking about equity and about seeding power, and some that are not. And then also on the nonprofit side. And we can figure that out pretty well in terms of when we describe the process. We are really explicit about what the process is going to feel like in terms of the type of activities that we're going to create, the type of input that we're going to want to seed, and the type of accountability that we expect to hold ourselves to and also our partners to in terms of accountability back to the end user, the customer. The other thing that's important in selecting the right partners, making sure that they are part of the right network. Are they external and coming into this community and trying to create change without any credibility? Probably not the right fit for us. Are they locally based and staffed and led by people from the community who are respected and have a really good bead on, the right leaders to engage with, the right, third parties to engage in the process? Those are the kinds of partners we're looking for. And at the end of the day, we're going to put a lot of our trust and faith in them to decide, what is the right amount of engagement to have, at any particular level. There are lots of instances where we've challenged our partners and said, you need to go further. And we don't think that this project is sufficiently inclusive, and here's what we think should change. But also, there's a finite amount of time and a finite amount of budget to do any project, even if it's a huge project. So you do have to draw the line at some place. And for me, it comes down to making sure you've got the right partners and continuously checking in on how the work is going and what the feedback is from the community. And if it's positive and specific, then you're on the right track, but you can't ever hope to get it perfectly right. So that's just something that you have to make your peace with.
Great. This question from Sidsel seems to be a neat follow-up to that, which basically says, thank you for a great talk. It's very inspiring to hear about your experiences. I am wondering what methods you use to identify the issues, such as sign up and product selection, etc. In the case with WIC in Dallas.
Yeah, so for the case of Dallas, a lot of the methods were qualitative. It was basically like going shopping with moms, interviewing moms, lots of people, like many families, going to talk to grocery chain owners and store managers. And you can pretty quickly start to see the patterns and understand that, like, look, the reason why people are quitting this program is because they felt crappy using it. And they felt crappy because they were being humiliated at these pain points. Sometimes that is good enough. Other times you need like different tools to help pinpoint. So I'll give you an example of a project we did with Airtel, which is a mobile network operator in East Africa, which was a project that was trying to figure out how to increase the use of mobile money products, like access to banking, insurance, savings through your phone in communities where there were no local banks. And basically the only alternative was like a loan shark in your neighborhood. And you basically had that choice or nothing. But even though these products were really easy and everyone who had Airtel already had them on their phone, sort of the question was like, why aren't more people using them? And at the end of the day, what we did was a data analysis using a data science partner to help identify basically where were the customers that were the super users. And the analysis basically helped pinpoint that a subset of agents that were the folks helping people like put minutes on their phone and sort of use the service were actually coaching customers into using the mobile money products to their customers' advantage, of course. And so in that case, it took a pretty big data science project to start to figure out where the success factors were. And then we took the qualitative and we put it on afterwards, and we found the right agents and we did design projects with them to try to figure out what were the behaviors, what were the methods, what were the practices that they were using, and how might we scale that. So depending on the size of the brief or the challenge, you may need to use different methods.
Very cool. This question comes from Marquise, and this is a fun one. Do you think what you learned in DT has helped you with your work, and how?
Definitely. I think what I learned in DT Well, I mean, I learned a lot of like technical stuff, obviously. I think what, and I remember meeting with Sven when I was considering DT and a different program in industrial design. And he was basically like, look, this isn't an air conditioner repair school. We don't like teach you like a set of like simple skills. Like this is an experimental place. You're going to have to find your own path. And I think that the ambiguity of the work of basically figuring out like, what do you care about? What's interesting to you? What are the tools that you're going to need to use to bring your vision to life? Teach yourself something has been instrumental in my career and certainly in our work, as much as we try to have replicable methods, replicable project templates, and there's a lot of support peer-to-peer. At the end of the day, we're solving a lot of ambiguous problems. And I think that I think that was a great proving ground and a great experimentation zone.
Let's see, we are running out of time, but I want to try to fit in these last couple of questions. And actually, I think since maybe what we're going to do is, okay, here's one. It was mentioned that IDEO.org works with low-income families to help children from those families come out of generational poverty. I assume these are projects that take years before one can see the impact. Does IDEO.org keep a tab on these, and are these projects especially hard because parents are also in the equation, even though the children are the main focus?
Yeah, so we do a, it is a challenge for us as an impact focused organization to keep tabs on all of the projects, just because we're not the one, we don't have the data. So we have an impact team, they're super smart, and they often will do calls back to our partners to find out what's going on with this project, either like, have you evolved it? How did that go? How many people are being served? What are the results? And sometimes, we get really good data. Sometimes we don't. Some projects are successful, some are not. The intergenerational poverty ones, as you aptly noted, they're generational. They go on for years. And we're really at the sort of very beginning of those projects, in part because we're at the beginning of the organizations that provide those services recognizing that they need to provide them in a different way. And that's really the work that we're helping them do, is discover what it looks like to do it in a different way. So just as an example, like there's a whole element to this, which is around goal setting. But like part of our work has helped government agencies and nonprofits recognize that a lot of the people that they're hoping would set goals and meet, financial goals and realize those goals, like don't even feel like they have the permission to dream. So we're having conversations and prototyping around what it looks like to create spaces to give people room just to dream. That's the sort of foundational level stuff that we're talking about here. In many cases. In other cases, it is about sort of what are called 2-gen method programs, which are these kids plus parents. And there's a lot of academic research that proves that it would work, but it's now the hard work of helping scores or hundreds and hundreds of nonprofits transition their services from siloed adult or kid services into these blended programs. So it's a big transformation project. And I think it'll be a long time before we see any results from our work, but we do have some immediate feedback from the partners, which are like, this is really exciting. This is a totally new way for us to work. We feel really inspired and we're going to try to do this. So it's at the beginning of a generational shift.
All right, so we're heading up on at the end of time. Basically, we're out of time. We're gonna have one more question because I think it's a good one to close on, which is if you can talk about them, what are the projects that are the most successful ones or the ones that you are most proud of?
I actually share, there's a lot of them. I shared 2 with you guys today that I feel personally really proud of. I think in particular for the Kuja Kuja project, just to basically say, here's a global industry that basically is not holding itself accountable to the most important person in this equation. How do we completely shift that? And how do we set a new standard for the sector, and how do we as a light lead by example, show it can be done, show that people have better outcomes when we listen to them and value their ideas. And that being the like really sort of like textbook place for IDEO.org to be engaging with partners, which is like a brand new approach to a really hard problem that is giving voice and agency to folks who are being denied it, is the kind of project that I want to do over and over again every day. The work is just really inspiring. And yeah, it's one of the projects. And just to be clear, I did not work on that project. It's a separate team. But even so, like I am personally really, really proud of that work.
That's absolutely fantastic. So we're going to have to wrap this up, even though I see the questions in the chat, and I know I appreciate so much enthusiasm from the community here to want to know more about Ben's work. But what we're going to do is we're going to close up, and I just want to mention this, what you said there, Ben, about what would it be like to have spaces to dream? My goodness, what an evocative question, and I think one that we can all take away with us and ruminate upon, the spaces that we might have to dream in our own lives. And for everyone out there in your course of study, where do you have the space to dream? So thank you so much, Ben, for joining us. We loved your talk. Was fantastic to see you come back and spend time with us. And as we're wrapping up, I just want to say many thanks to Smitha Alluri for graphic design, to our program coordinator in AMT, Joel Hahn, and to the support from our programs, Colleen Macklin and Sven Travis in MFADT, Melanie Crane in BFADT. Thank you all for joining us in this talk, and we will meet again in the future and continue this. So thank you, everybody, and have a great afternoon. Thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you so much, Catherine. This was a real pleasure. Great to meet you all. Have a great day.
Okay.